Before we go into our interview today, I wanted to let everyone know we have a new sponsor for our Energy Question podcast, the U.S. Oil and Gas Association, or USOGA for short. First established in 1917, USOGA has been an effective and creative voice for the industry for more than a century now. USOGA is dedicated to educating the public, policymakers, and legislators at the federal, state, and local levels about the value of the domestic oil and natural gas industry. If you're in the industry and not currently a USOGA member, please consider joining the association as a way of helping it tell your story to the policymakers whose actions impact everything you do each and every day. You can start that process by contacting USOGA through its website, usoga.org. Thanks so much to USOGA for sponsoring the Energy Question podcast. And now on with our show.
Hey, welcome to the Energy Question with David Blackmon. We're on the floor of NAPE today. First day of the trade show has just opened up, and we are so lucky to have as our special guest to kick off the NAPE trade show, Doomberg, the beautiful, wonderful green chicken, who is one of the smartest people I've ever seen, one of the smartest analysts about economics in the energy space. Going today. He has a fantastic Substack that everyone needs to read and subscribe to. Doomberg, how are you today?
David, Stu, doing fantastic. Great to see all the action at the trade show. I was just joking with you off air how I'd have to show up to one of these in person someday.
Yeah.
Looks like a good time.
Yeah, we'll have to get you live in one of those mascot suits someday. That would be awesome. That would be awesome. Well, man, it's so eventful in the energy space right now. You have, actually, I think it's your most current piece called Cogent Analysis. Terrific analysis of how people predicting recession are kind of missing out on what's going on in the energy space currently. And I wanted to start by just giving you a chance to talk about that piece and tell everyone what your thought process is there.
Yeah, this is one of several pieces we've written on the topic in recent months. Look, as analysts, sometimes you get things wrong. And when you get things wrong, there's two ways to approach that. One is you attack people for telling you you're wrong. And the other is you try to figure out what it is that you got wrong, learn from it, and get better. And I'd say about 18 months ago, we were firmly in the recession is coming camp, and U.S. oil and gas production looks to be turning over camp. Both of those turned out to be wrong, and we put 1 and 2 together and came up with 3. The fact that we're swimming in cheap hydrocarbons probably is a good reason why we're not in a recession. And the first piece we wrote on this topic, well, we came to this conclusion after researching the natural gas market for our November Doom Zoom, where we saw the coming glut of liquefied natural gas around the world. And that caused us to ponder whether energy had flipped from sort of net short to net long, which I think everybody would agree it probably has. And so we wrote a piece on January 6th called Slick Landing, where the social preview was solving the mystery of the missing U.S. recession. And then we followed it up with this piece, motivated by Biden's move to pause new export approvals of LNG terminals, which at a minimum is signaling to the market that, you know, this glut of natural gas will persist. And it's just hard to argue that when you have a forward integrated manufacturing powerhouse like the U.S. still does, we like to talk as though everything is done in China, but in reality, we make a lot of stuff here. When you have a forward integrated manufacturing sector that is fully tied into the natural gas market, and natural gas is trading for $2 a million BTUs, or as we like to say, for a 4-pack of chicken nuggets.
Yeah.
You know, it's hard to imagine how the U.S. goes into a recession. Look, it's political, it's cynical. Long term, it's a very bad decision, but both things can be true. The ban on LNG and the continuing glut of trapped gas in the U.S. is bullish for the economy. It's probably bullish for Biden's political prospects. And at the same time, in the long term, it's a disastrous decision. And as analysts, I think we can't be tied to any desired outcome. You have to see the pieces on the board and play the next move.
Yeah, I was talking with Steve Reese, who's LNG consultant, about that decision here a few minutes ago. And, you know, one of the things I'm concerned about, and I wonder if it's reasonable, is it seems to me because the Biden administration has done so many actions like this, which are just kind of politically motivated decisions in the energy space that aren't really consistent with U.S. policy of the past, it could be damaging our reputation as a country, as a reliable trading partner, and damaging the ability of companies to make major investments with confidence that they know there's going to be some consistency of application in the U.S. legal structure. And I wonder what you think about that.
I certainly agree, but I think even more important in the short term is the consequence on investment. I mean, the one thing that investors need is regulatory certainty, and it almost
Right.
really doesn't matter what the rules are, just don't change them, especially don't change them mid-course, right? And it becomes harder to finance these projects. And your comment about losing our reputation abroad, I think the venture global situation doesn't help in that regard, and hopefully that gets resolved pretty soon. But from the political perspective, I think we could see natural gas roll over because at $2 a million BTU, it's hard to justify, new investment in the sector. And if we do, just as the entire downstream industry got addicted to this stuff, then the whiplash could be pretty substantial. And so it's not a good decision. It comes at a bad time for the industry. It comes at an opportune time for Biden. Somebody on his team knows commodities. I think the move to empty the SPR worked out well for him politically, and this probably will work out for him.
Somebody on their team knows.
Somebody does, yeah. I would say, back when Biden was a little more, choose my words carefully. When Biden was had a little bit more spring in his step. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
We used to jokingly refer to him as Joe Biden, DuPont. I mean, he comes from a state that is heavily dependent on commodities and chemicals, and he knew that industry quite well. I personally interacted with his staff on several occasions, and this was a politician who understood the critical role the price of gasoline at the pump played in his reelection campaigns, and whether you thought he was authentic or not. Find me a politician who is, frankly, on either side of the aisle. But he did know commodities, and I think he has played this particular situation well if your narrow consideration is short-term and political expediency.
Right.
So
from that standpoint, I think it is smart politics. I don't think there's any doubt about that. He's shoring up his base. He's, appealing to young voters who don't really understand what's happening, much about what's happening in the world. And from a political standpoint, I just worry about it from a long-term impact,
sure.
On the economy.
But let's not forget, under John Kerry's watch, the famed climate czar, the United States has set record production for oil, record production for petroleum products, record production for natural gas, and record refinery runs. And so the far left aspect of his base was agitating for this pause, the Bill McRibbon crowd and so on, and TikTok influencers and all that. But we also wrote about this when the news first broke. Look, there's a lot of people downstream of natural gas that were agitating for this move too. The chemical industry, power producers, all these people that are now going to get dirt cheap natural gas handed to them.
Back to what we were doing. Sorry about the interruption, folks. In my zeal to introduce the episode, I forgot to mention Stu Turley, the head of the Sandstone Group, is with us, and he also has his Energy Newsbeat podcast, which is going crazy. But Stu had a question for Doomberg while we were disconnected.
Your Substack is, I think, the #1 in the world, and I love being a subscriber. Your thought is out there, but with the LNG market changing so much, and the EIA has come out and said the only reason that we are reducing our CO2 emissions, the main primary reason is a reduction in coal, and then the increasing of natural gas plants. How do you see the regulatory issues through legislation through regulation against the entire energy space, as they're having to go through carbon tax, declaring all the stuff, because that cost is going to get thrown back to the consumers? Isn't that crazy about the legislation through regulatory actions?
Sure. Just one minor correction. We're number one in finance in the world. I don't know where we are
Oh.
on the entire Substack platform because they don't release that leaderboard. But if they did,
Right.
we would get competitive pretty quickly. No. So to your question, Stu, I don't think we're going to reduce our carbon emissions at all. I think we have a little rule we call Doomberg's postulate, which says every ton of fossil fuels produced around the world will be burned by somebody somewhere, and local restrictions merely shift who gets the privilege of doing so. And take coal, for example. Yes, the US has reduced its nationwide emissions because it has displaced coal with natural gas, but we're just exporting coal, and the developing world will greedily accept the tonnage of coal that we refuse to burn, and they'll burn it over there. And our view is all primary energy development is additive. There's an infinite demand for energy at reasonable prices because energy is life. Your standard of living is defined by how much energy you personally get to harvest. And all humans everywhere want a higher standard of living. And there's 5 to 6 billion people on the planet that have a standard of living that we would consider unacceptable. And they aspire to climb Maslow's hierarchy of needs, just like we have done. And who are we to forbid them from doing so? And so if Europe discards coal and the US discards coal, well, Indonesia and India and China will burn it. I mean, China is adding coal plants at an impressive rate. We are going to roll the dice on climate change. Whatever your views are on whether carbon emissions matter and whether CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere affect the climate and whether humans are predominantly responsible, we're going to roll the dice. And so our view is the money that we are wasting on trying to prevent it should be saved up and spent on remediating as things arise. That's the only sane policy, because China doesn't care about climate change. It's building how many scores of gigawatts of coal facilities as we speak.
246 gigawatts, right? That are
It's
planned
insane
right now.
It's crazy. And they're going to burn every molecule they get their hands on, whether we do or not, right? I mean, it's silly.
Well, it is silly. And to prove your postulate, right? I mean, we just saw the news story at Reuters Tuesday, I guess it was, that over the last 2 years, the coal industry in the United States has had the 2 biggest years for total value of coal exported since 2017. And this is during the Joe Biden administration.
Well, again, we didn't shut down the mines. We just shut down the power plants. So
right.
the coal had to go somewhere. I mean, we are mining less than we used to. It is getting harder to site new mines, and all of those things are political choices, but integrated across the world. You know, we've been doing a little interesting story about China's attempts to crack its shale resources. You know, like people assume that the Chinese are just sitting around allowing themselves to be dependent on energy imports from the Middle East that run through various choke points, and they're not doing anything about it. Look, they have a petroleum university, an entire university dedicated to petroleum engineering. And the last I checked, it had 15,000 enrollees. We had 600 graduate across the whole country in the U.S. last year. This is why when people talk about like Russia and their inability to produce commodities, this techno arrogance on our part over here is a real challenge. They are going to steal whatever technology they need and do whatever they can to achieve energy independence. It's a project on par with their semiconductor efforts on Xi Jinping's national strategic priorities. Now, look, we can poo-poo their efforts and we could downplay them and we could assert Western technical superiority, but that's not going to change reality on the ground. So
no, it's not. And nothing's going to change here in terms of policy when you replace John Kerry with John Podesta.
Oh, no way.
That's a bizarre appointment. Really, I mean,
but you knew it was coming, didn't you? I mean, that was obviously what was going to happen, right? I mean, I think it was foregone conclusion, really.
When you want to talk about positions that are unnecessary, I mean,
God.
You know, but I digress. It's to the main point. You know, we've done a lot of analysis here around the BTU per capita, you know, of a nation and where various countries are. And we call them the P7, the poorest, largest population countries not in the G7. And there's like 4.5, 5 billion people that are living on a weighted average basis on a 1/8 of what we do in the U.S. Like, and then they are 10 times our population, and let's say 1/8 the energy use.
Right.
Who are we kidding? Like, we will be producing more oil, more gas, more coal in 2040 than we do today, or there'll be a lot of dead people. Those are the two choices.
Well, but you know what? There's people in the movement who would be just fine with that. I think you see that kind of rhetoric coming up more and more often out of the climate change movement, the need to reduce population. And you can see by their actions, they're taking actions designed to make that happen.
It's a very slippery slope. It's dangerous thinking. There is no doubt that amongst the hardcore environmentalists from the 60s and 70s, there is an ugly strain of Malthusian thinking at the heart of their beliefs. I don't think the average person who is concerned or has been made to be concerned about the environment understands the true consequences of the Malthusian logic chain. But once presented with those consequences, they would be appalled by it, of course, and correctly so. And this is what we call the soft left, the sort of the soft left and the soft right. And the soft left, gets fed their news from various social media sites and curated by algorithms, and they've been made to be concerned about climate change. And when push comes to shove, I mean, they're not going to make a major change in their standard of living or their lifestyles to accommodate these. And this is why we're seeing a totally predictable move to the right in Germany and elsewhere. And frankly, Biden getting ahead of it here. Like Biden's actual decisions are inconsistent with John Kerry's rhetoric.
Yes, they are. Yeah.
And so, again, we play this game, but ultimately we know how it has to end. And so that makes for lots of things to write about. So in a way, it's bullish for us.
I've never had so much material in my life.
Stu, I interrupted you a minute ago.
When we sit back, I want your opinion, Mr. Doomberg, on California, my beloved weirdness that is out there. President Xi came rolling over and had the big meetings with Governor Newsom. And that besides talking about importing of hair care products, they were actually, I believe that China has increased, David, and you have to correct me wrong, over 1 million barrels per day of downstream refining capabilities. Newsom has been reducing has just totally killed the oil and gas and refining business. And I've heard rumblings that there are contracts coming for California to buy diesel and gasoline from China. Tell me that's not good for the environment.
Yeah, these are the types of situations that arise when you have the Jones Act in the US, which limits the ability to move liquids and gases from our Gulf Coast refineries to the Northeast or California, where we lack pipelines. So an even more perverse example, the relative shortage of diesel in the Northeast last year was corrected because we imported refined diesel from India. And where did India get the oil? They got it from Russia.
Of course.
And so these types of absurdities are look, we kicked a few feathers earlier, late last year, early this year, when we wrote a series of articles saying peak cheap oil was a myth. A classic example of why we believe peak cheap oil is a myth is how much reserves and resources we're sitting on in California and off the Pacific coast and off the coast of Florida that are just off limits. Alaska. These are political choices. Today, the Democrats dominate California. If gasoline goes to $20 a gallon, guess who's not going to be dominating politics in California for very long? And so these political decisions could be wiped away. Look, we're all for global trade.
Yep.
Who cares where it's refined? If it's cheaper to refine it in China and have it show up here. Now, there is some national security concerns, and we do believe the market fails to price those. But the U.S. is an energy juggernaut. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. We, even under Biden, from Trump to Biden, we have added 2.5 Saudi Arabias across gas and oil and NGLs.
Wow.
It's insane. We produce, if you go for the wider definition of oil, which includes condensates and NGLs, and in our view, any hydrocarbon that finds its way into the refinery network, we're producing 20 million barrels a day.
Yeah.
More than any country has ever produced ever, 20% of global supply. We're producing something like between 25 and 30% of all the natural gas in the world. As we wrote in this most recent piece, U.S. natural gas is 6% of all global energy. bigger than
Wow.
I did not
Wow.
know it was that much.
bigger than every country's consumption on Earth except for China and India. And I believe in 23 we probably passed India. Natural gas alone in the U.S. is just an enormous energy machine. I'm pulling up the numbers because with various units. In exajoules, 35 exajoules of natural gas production in the U.S. versus 604 exajoules of global consumption across oil, natural gas, coal, nuclear, solar, wind, biomass, and hydro. So, and this is why we're not in a recession. I mean, we've
Thank you, Joe Biden.
we've injected this into the veins of our manufacturing base at a time when, for national security reasons, we're embarking on a massive construction boom of new manufacturing facilities, which is now starting to work its way into the jobs report. And so you may have thought we were going to a recession, maybe even secretly wanted one because you wanted Biden to lose the election or whatever your pre-existing bias is. The facts are unsurprising. When you have a sea of cheap hydrocarbons, so natural gas is roughly $12 a barrel oil on an energy basis today in the US.
Wow.
And we have an enormous amount of it. What's an advantage?
Sorry,
No, go
Mr.
ahead.
Doomberg, I
Go ahead.
apologize. In the EU, Germany this morning just announced that they're approving nuclear as their path forward from their energy department. How fun is that? They just killed their nuclear.
They just shut them all down.
last year.
Is that
And-
true? I'm pulling that up. I can't
I
be
haven't
sure.
seen that
I haven't
piece.
seen that.
And it's absolutely a hoot. And I'm like, okay,
Um,
so the
I-
deindustrialization of Europe
I
is
thought
happening.
Germany was going to natural gas.
Yeah, that's what I saw. They approved 10 gigawatts of natural gas
And
after shutting down
UK's
their
going
nuclear.
to nuclear.
UK is going to nuclear. That's
Oh, I
right.
thought it was.
No,
okay,
Germany's
I thought it
going to
was-
natural
I thought
gas.
Germany tagged
Yeah.
on to that.
Well, we're writing that piece next, or perhaps we will, so I could give you a few details.
Oh,
I
good.
absolutely want.
Yeah,
I can't wait to see it.
Yes.
they are they just approved, I believe, 10 gigawatts expansion of natural gas to
wow.
roughly offset what they turned off arbitrarily and voluntarily in the nuclear sector. But to make matters even funnier, they're pretending as though these plants will be sort of capable of accepting hydrogen or a little bit of
Sure.
hydrogen in
Yeah.
with their nitrogen.
Yes.
So they're marketing this as a hydrogen economy enabling investment.
What a scam.
and
The
so-
Hindenburg blew up for a reason, Mr.
Yeah,
Doomberg.
hydrogen is interesting. We have sort of mixed views on the molecule, and I don't know if you saw a recent piece where this whole concept of drilling for hydrogen, natural hydrogen, was a
Yeah,
surprise to
yeah.
us.
Yeah.
So we keep an eye on hydrogen. Hydrogen burns clean. It's
Yep.
got a lot of energy on a gravimetric basis. It's very energy dense, and we do produce a ton of it today. We know how to handle it. It's the precursor for fertilizer, and it's used
Right.
pretty extensively in the refinery network. And so hydrogen is interesting. The natural arc of humanity is to go from wood to coal to oil to natural gas, which you could, if you
Right.
chemically, you could see that the ratio of hydrogen to carbon is increasing as you go from left to right in that
Right.
arc. And the natural endpoint is, if natural hydrogen is real, which it might very well be, just using hydrogen
Yeah.
directly and circumventing the carbon emissions altogether. Now, as we said in the piece, of course, you could tell that it might be real because environmentalists are already lining up to oppose it.
Of course, because it doesn't benefit their rent-seeking industries, right? I mean,
Exactly. It's
yeah,
going to be
it's
interesting to
fun.
see the knots they twist themselves into to turn
Oh, it's-
hydrogen from savior to villain.
but it's
over time.
inevitable. It's inevitable
Right.
that that's going to happen. Of course it will.
David and Mr. Doomberg, with the sliding, the BP announcing that they're getting out of some of the wind, seems
And Ørsted,
losing
yeah.
so much of the wind. I believe that they're now moving to carbon tax as that group in order to replace their money grab, if you want to call it. You have to almost assume it's a wealth transfer or whatever it is on the high increase in the cost of energy. And I don't know why that seems to be that way. But it seems like they're pushing more carbon tax and carbon things, and it's going to affect the consumers even more. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, probably unlikely to happen in the US. I think we see it in countries like
Okay.
Canada and Europe.
Yeah.
where the population is a little more pliable. in
How's
that
it working
regard.
out in Canada, by the way? How's
Out of
that working
Canada.
out for 'em?
It's just Canada, which we could do a whole podcast on our
Oh, I
favorite
know. We
Prime
need to
Minister
do that.
Justin Trudeau, who's
Holy
po-
smokes, Batman.
a popular punching bag for us on Doomberg. We wrote a piece in September of last year called Windbaggery, where we predicted the imminent demise of the wind industry, and I think that piece has aged well. Let's
Yes, it
put that
has.
way.
No doubt about it. So I wrote a piece, I guess it was in the Daily Caller, right?
Read it
You know,
yesterday.
just we're kind of talking about how the wind industry is really struggling now. I mean, to me, it's really kind of teetering on the verge right now. And the EV industry is having all these problems. It's still growing, and people need to understand demand for EVs is still rising. It's just that it's kind of flattening out. And there isn't a single aspect of this energy transition that's envisioned in the Green New Deal and the Biden policies that's really working out right now for them, is there?
I enjoyed that piece in the Daily Caller yesterday. I also enjoyed
Thanks.
your piece this morning on the crazy politician in Canada.
Oh my
who is,
God. Yeah, we can talk about him too.
making it illegal to
Wouldn't that be
criticize.
fun?
Yeah, we're all going to be in jail from this podcast if that guy gets his way.
Not him.
You know,
I'm
it-
sorry. I'd like to see your passport, Mr. Doomberg.
Yeah. Which one?
How do you arrest a cartoon? That's what
Yeah.
I want to.
Back to wind though, I think there's a real scandal there, which we've made reference to in that piece. This whole IRS retooling of existing wind turbines long before their life was expected to come to its natural end, merely to get more
Yeah.
money out of the government. And so now we have these giant turbine blades accumulating in landfills all over the country, a total waste of money. It's really a scandal. Like it's a grift. Now the offshore industry, I think, is dead, dead and buried. Like that's just
Good.
not going to happen. Now
That's the best news I've heard all day.
onshore is perhaps a different story, but I still think that these turbines are stationary future liability risks for these companies, and it's
Yeah. So decommissioning these offshore projects whenever that's actually done is actually somebody told me it's actually going to cost more than building them, right?
I mean, who knows?
If you actually do it right.
It'll be all covered up, so it doesn't
Yeah.
matter. It just can't work. I mean, it is one of those things. Like the opposition to them, the NIMBYism, which is totally real and totally understandable.
Totally real, yeah.
Our friend Robert Bryce has that amazing.
Boy, he's done such great work.
Done
Yeah.
great with that amazing canceled projects list of wind and solar local
Yeah.
opposition, and his documentary that you referenced in your piece this
So
morning.
fantastic. Everyone needs to watch it.
Yeah, it's called Juice:
Yeah.
Power, Politics, and the Grid. If people listening want to go see it, we're always happy to promote the good work of our friends like
too,
Robert.
me too.
It's a really great documentary, and so yeah, it in the end, these policies are luxuries of the wealthy. Let's be honest.
Wow, I love
and-
the way you say that.
And so we can tinker around with wind and solar and EVs and pretend like it's going to make a difference. And we could put a couple of vanity solar panels on our roof to tell our neighbors that we care more about the environment than they do. And we could have our third car be a Tesla, as long as we don't go on long trips with it.
Sure.
And 0 to 60 time is really important to saving the environment, apparently.
Yep.
Is
I
there
don't know.
any more overrated selling point for any car in history than the
Oh.
torque in an EV?
Look, I
When
mean,
you're
if you
living
want,
in a big city and stop and go traffic and
I-
30
this
mile
is,
an
this
hour.
is this has always rubbed me the wrong way.
Yeah.
I mean,
Oh, yeah.
first of all, we're big believers that if battery materials are their limiting constraint, then we need to manage that constraint. And plug-in hybrids make a lot more sense, and their designs exist. And you could go 40, 50 miles on battery alone, and most people don't travel that much in a given day, and you don't have to worry about range anxiety because you fill up with gasoline. And look, on a gallon of gasoline abated per kilogram of battery basis,
Right.
Toyota's got it right. The Prius,
Yeah.
soft hybrids, plug-in hybrids.
Well,
so-
Toyota is going to lead the charge with
Yeah.
the hybrids.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Well, they have been.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
they've caught a
Volvo,
lot of
too.
heat. They've caught a lot of heat for not going full BEV.
Yeah.
I think the EV bubble stock phenomenon caused a massive malinvestment in the auto industry that's going to set it back 10 years.
Oh, yes.
Everybody was chasing that multiple because they believe, board of directors saw what happened with Tesla stock and decided that they needed to have their own
Sure.
EV strategy.
Yeah.
And we're seeing it now. There's the fundamental incompatibility with the American way of life and electric vehicles makes their inevitable that they will be a niche product. I mean, they're a few percentage points of demand, but that's about it.
Well, you don't think we're all going to be living in a 15-minute city with mass public transportation in 20 years?
I'm more
I think
likely to be driving around in a Power Stroke diesel resto mod than I am to be living in a pod somewhere,
Yeah.
eating bugs, as we might say.
No, I'm sorry. My Ford 250, I'm looking at getting a 350 because I can. I'm sorry. I can't tow everything that I need to tow or actually do work with the Dodge Ram. This one cracked me up. It's got a 6-cylinder in it, and it's a full EV, and that 6-cylinder does one thing. It's like an old World War II technology. It charges the batteries.
Well,
So it's a hybrid.
How many Cybertrucks can we put you down for, Stu?
Yeah,
I'll
exactly.
take 2.
Yeah, yeah.
Only because it's bulletproof, Mr. Doomberg,
Yeah,
because my podcast, I'm like a hunted man.
The Cybertruck, and I actually admire Elon Musk in a lot of ways, and I don't like to badmouth him. That is the dumbest design I've ever seen. It's a DeLorean. It's a DeLorean. I mean,
he's got his fans.
yeah. Well, no, I know he does. I know he does.
Buy one, honestly, to support him. I love Twitter from the standpoint that I put out some controversial. Michael Yon was the war correspondent, and I put that on Twitter. And it's in 12 hours, it had 100,000 views for a 2-hour video. For them to register it as that, people sat through in 12 hours that thing. You got to get that censored on LinkedIn. It's censored
of course it is,
on
yeah.
Google.
And YouTube
censored
probably.
everywhere else. But it's critical. So I want to support it. But
So
Mr. Doomberg just said that would have to be my third pickup.
So I know we're probably
Vanity
already
car.
over 30 minutes, but I want to do one more thing. And we kind of touched on it earlier, is we have this phenomenon now, and I talked about it last week, where we have a rig count that's, getting close to kind of record lows almost, 499 the last 2 weeks, according to Baker Hughes. At the same time, we have a kind of, a booming production of both oil and gas in the United States. We're producing all this natural gas, folks, with about 120 active natural gas drilling rigs, and altogether there's 499 in the United States. What is your take on that? What do you see as the reason why our industry has been able to so dramatically increase production overall while laying down rigs? I mean, there's no question that's what's happened.
I think this speaks to the broader question of, one, the massive powerhouse of technology embedded within the fossil fuel industry, and the deflationary impact of the continuous improvement mindset that these scores of thousands of professional engineers, PhDs, technicians, and field workers that do the dizzying array of work that keep the lights on and make modern life possible for us. There's a massive amount of technology embedded in the industry. Continuous improvement. It's as price takers, the only real knob they have to turn is cost, and that knob gets turned a lot. Secondly, we have radically underestimated that, and in fact, part of our arguments around the whole cheap oil stuff is that it's difficult to look at backwards-looking data without properly correcting for the exponential growth in technology. And so what does a rig count mean today versus what it meant 5 years ago versus what it meant 10 years ago? It makes using old indicators to predict the future very challenging, because the underlying change, the dynamic nature of the industry, it truly is. I mean, of course, I'm biased. I spent 20 years in and around the sector and have many friends who work there. And I have a visceral appreciation when I flip on a switch and the light comes on, or I turn a knob and my natural gas fireplace in my living room fires up. And so I appreciate those people. I don't begrudge them. In fact, I think our lack of respect for the industry is one of the great catastrophic errors of our society. And so I like to remind people at every opportunity that if you think Apple and Google and Facebook are the technology companies, you're missing out on a whole bunch of fascinating science and technology. You're talking
it's
about
all over this show floor.
it's
today.
absolutely. You guys know better than
it's
anybody. You're living in
unbelievable.
it, and I think these people are heroes, not
Yes,
villains.
I
And
do. I always have. Yeah.
One last question, real quick. Mr. Doomberg, when we take a look at the dark fleet, you have the 500 to 600 tankers that Venezuela, Iran, Iraq, they all use it in order to bypass the sanctions. And Iran went from 400,000 barrels a day to 3.1 or 3.2.
I think something like that.
Something like that. And it got by going around the insurance companies in the UK. They've self-insured these tankers. You get tetanus from even looking at them. If they have a wreck or something, they're going to just be horrible. But the second order effect of that fleet is the pricing matrices on oil. It's never a supply and demand is what it seems like with me, with OPEC, OPEC plus, because a lot of that oil is coming outside the OPEC pricing structures.
The bifurcated market. that we
And,
got
and so
now,
is OPEC now lost all this traction in your opinion? And how's the oil pricing even figured out?
well, it's ultimately supply and demand in the physical markets that drives everything, and then you layer over that some paper trading and some sentiment and so on. But I would say the weakening of OPEC is predominantly because of the rise of the U.S. more than anything else.
Okay.
I think NGL production alone would make it the second or third largest OPEC producer, just with our natural gas liquids. And
with that,
and so when you add 2.5 Saudi Arabias, you become stronger geopolitically, and your economy does better. That's pretty simple. That's the level of analysis that we prefer to just stay at, nice and simple.
Yeah.
I like it.
Well, Doomberg, I can't thank you enough for this. I really appreciate you and what you're doing. I just think you are a tremendous public service, and you yourself are a hero. We talked about these folks being heroes. No, really, you really are, because of the tremendous amount of really true information you're putting out into the public domain to offset so much of the propaganda in the media. And I just really can't thank you enough for being on the show.
Well, it's nice of you to say, but we are capitalists first and foremost. And so if anybody listening to this would like to become paying subscribers, they could head over to doomberg.substack.com and sign up.
It's worth every penny, sir.
We're more than happy to sing for our supper on podcasts like this, but we make our money by publishing our newsletter. And so if people are interested, please head on over. David, Stu is fantastic. Enjoy the rest of the show. It looks like a great time.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
And
Have a great
see you
day.
next time, sir.